Okay. So yesterday we learned about a gufa about how on Erev Pesach Rabbi Yehuda told us they would flood the whole Azara, and the water would be up to their knees, and they would take 1 cup of mush, whatever was there, that mixture, blood and water, and they would throw that on the mizbeach just in case one of their karbanos, one of the many karbanos of Korban Pesach that was brought that day, the dam spilled out, so they have this dam of which there'd be a small content of everyone's carbon, and that's how they would be yochid Zrika. Break the Gemara, how would the Kohanim know that that all of the blood that would have spilled anywhere would have had already a Kabbalah Saddam? Zok the Gemara, because Kohanim's reasoning, and if we look into the Tziyunim on the side, Kohanim's reasoning, the Ish and therefore Kohanim, did we start to go for yesterday? Oh yeah. Okay, Kohanim's reasoning, Frank E's reasoning, if there's reason, so then what's the whole concern in the first place? The whole reason why you're taking this cup of blood and water is because maybe some of the dam from one of the karbanos was nishtapach on the floor. They didn't do zrika. If your Kaim's reason, how would that happen? His reason name is tapuche nami loy mishtapach. So vital, why did they need to do this? Zokner for carrot. Agav this reason, since the Kohanim are reason and they move quickly, therefore we're going to abdin haya and they do it fast. Rashi's mehera. Therefore, mishtachin, some things could get spilled out. For carrot, the there's reason sometimes when people are moving quickly, something could spill, and because of that, they would take a scoop of the water in the Azor. And you remember that they used to plug the outlet of this Amma. So all of the dam that was in the Azor stayed in place. And there was one huge mixture, one huge little lake of a mixture of dam and whatever else was there. And dam and water. Break the Gemara, but v'haloi dam hatamtis mu'urav boy. There is dam hatamsis. Exactly what dam hatamsis is, there's a couple of different explanations I saw. One is after the dam hanefesh comes out of the neck, it's the dam from there. Others learn it's the dam evorim. There are different pratim of exactly what dam hatamsis is, but whatever it is, it's dam that you cannot do zrikon. Zakamar b'yudel tamei damer tam dam hatamsis kari dam. Rabbi Yehuda, it's called dam, and it has the full halacha of dam, meaning you're also able to do zrika with it. The Tanya, dam hatamsis ba'asara. It's not the dam hanefesh that has a chi of course if you eat it. That's the teachita of the Tanakama. But Rabbi Yehuda b'kares. Why? Because it's the real dam. This is the dam hanefesh, and therefore it should also be good for zrika. Even though Rabbi Yehuda said you get cars for eating this dam, he agrees that it would not be good to do zrika, because it says kedamu nefesh dam shen nefesh yoytze boy kari dam shen nefesh yoytze boy ein kari dam, and dam hatamsis is not dam shen nefesh yoytze boy. Ella, you know why Rabbi Yehuda is not worried about the dam hatamsis that's mixed into the dam? Because Rabbi Yehuda tamei damer ein dam mevatel dam. Dam is not mevatel dam. Why? So if you look at the first skinny Rashi, the Rashi in the first skinny line, the min b'minoi Rabbi Yehuda lebatel. He holds min b'minoi is lebatel. Yes, there might be a lot of dam hatamsis there, but there is also dam that you can make shrik on, and therefore this plan works with taking a scoop of water from the Azar. Amalei Rabbi Yehuda. So Rabbi Yehuda told him, if you don't agree that you do this, that you take the cup of whatever's there and dump it on the mizbeach, so lama plug in hazara. So why would they plug the outlet? Why don't they let the flush remain? The only reason why it would make sense why they would do that is so that they are able to capture all of them. Amrullah, they told him, it has nothing to do with that. It's shavachu levnei Aaron sheyaholchu ad akru v'yiseyan b'dam. It's a beautiful thing that they should literally be swimming in the blood of the mitzvah, in the blood of the carbon. But vadama v'chatzitza. They have to stand with their feet on the stone floor of the Azara. We learned that if there's something in between, if there's a chatzitza, they're called zara, and the avodah will be possible. So it's more about lachu. It's liquid dam. Liquid dam is not going to create a chatzitza, but have a chatzitza. Ditnan hadam v'adayoy v'advash v'acholov yevation If they're dry, choyzitzin. But lachin, if they're in liquid form, ain't choyzitzin. Correct, Gemara. Okay, but kametusia kametvasi manayu. Their begodim are going to get dirty, and we learned earlier utnam hoyu begodim mitush toshin. If a kohen has filthy clothing, the avad and he does avoid with dirty clothing, avoid dasei psula. Zok Gemara b'chitema demadlahu. If you're going to say they're going to lift up the hem so that the water level should not reach their begodim, so their begodim will stay dry and clean. But Tanya, we learned madoi midoi bad midasoi. It has to fit him, meaning shalo yachshav shalo yoiser. It has to fit him, so you cannot roll it up. We actually decide if you roll it up, if that's going to make it possible. Zok Gemara. Okay, you're right. But we're talking about halachas evorim lekevesh, the lab avodu. You know when they got, if they rolled up their begodim, you know when they did avodah that way? That was when they made halacha. There is not a problem. You told me the halacha is not an avodah, but Tanya v'hikav hakoyin is hakoil. Zu halachas evorim lekevesh. You see, it is a hakrava. Okay, so they only had to go into dam and the water, where they took the wood to the maracha, that's for sure not an avodah, lav avodah. But Frank Gemara, what do you mean? The whole avodah the whole azara is flooded with water and dam. How did they do the avodah? Ula avodah hecha asli. You can't say only for that avodah. If it was full of, there's a river that used to travel through the azara. So if they block the outlet, it just starts to build up. So Zokta Asliya it's to be. Built into the floor, there was stone platforms so that they would be able to walk along those stone platforms that were above the level of the water. And Rashi says, why aren't those stone platforms themselves considered a hefsek? Zok Rashi, that was built into the floor. It was built into the floor of the Azara, I guess, in the pathway that they needed to move around, some elevated places on the floor, like steps, where they would be able to walk across. So it looked like they were walking on water. Who knows where Yoshka got it from? Zok the Gemara weiter. Zok the Heilige Mishnah. Hashoichet es hazevach. Someone shechts a zevach. This is a Mishnah that we learned already many times, so it'll be an easy Mishnah. Lechol dover shein darkei lechol ulahaktir dover shein darkei lahaktir. Either to eat a murin or to be makter meat. Kosher, the carbon is kosher because that's not a good machshavas pigel. Rabbi Eliezer Paisel. Rabbi Eliezer holds it's possible because he holds even if you had kavanah to eat something that you normally maktir or to be maktir something that you normally eat, that will also be a machshavas pigel. How about lechol dover shedarkei lechol ulahaktir dover shedarkei lahaktir? So if it's pachas mikazayis, again it's kosher because you have to have kavanah on an achila, which is a kazayis.
What's wrong with that much trouble?
Why won't it be pigel?
Because
Because pachas mikazayis. The key is pachas mikazayis.
it's not dover. Oh,
No, so it is dover shtakalach, but it's not. You don't have a kavanah to eat enough of it. Or how about lechol kechatzi zayis ulahaktir kechatzi zayis? That's also kosher. Shein achila v'aktara mistarfin. And if you remember, we learned that's only if haktara is expressed b'lashon haktara. But if haktara is mentioned, with a nuscha b'chila, it would be mistarfin. Hashoichet is a zevach. Lechol kezayis min or the hide. Roitev is gravy that you would cook it in. Kipa Rashi teaches as the bottom of the pot. There'll be like little fibers of meat and spice, the stuff that hangs around at the bottom of the pot, but there's some meat content there. When the alal is some type of a nerve that goes through the neck of the animal, that's not edible. Umina atzomos, and from the bones. Umina gidin, and from the sinews. Umina karnaim, and from the horns. Umina klofim, or from the hooves. Chutz lizmanoi v'chutz l'mkoimoi. If you had kavanah pigel about eating any one of these, which are not things that are normally eaten, kosher, the carbon is kosher, because pigel is a machshava to eat only things that are made to eat. Ve'ein chayavin alei mishum pigel, noiser v'tamei. And even if you had an animal that was pigel, someone checked out an animal and in das to eat the basar out of bounds or out of the right time. So the halacha is any part of the animal you eat is either possible or chayiv korish, depending if it was chustam koyim or chustam malay. But if you ate the hoof of the animal or if you ate the horn of the animal, or if you ate any one of these items in this list, there wouldn't even be a chiyuv pigel because that's not even called part of the animal that's eaten. So there wouldn't even be an isur pigel chal on it. So to use the technical words, it's not mifagel and it's not mispagel. If you had kavanah to eat those out of bounds, that won't make it pigel. And even if you had kavanah to eat the meat out of bounds, or to make the zrik out of bounds, it's not mispagel, it doesn't become pigel at all. Hashoichet as a mukdoshin. What if you shechted a female animal, Rashi says, lechel shalil, to eat, you had in mind, not to eat its basar out of bounds, but to eat its shalil, a fetus, a half-baked fetus, or shilya, or the shilya, I think, is a placenta. It's meat inside the animal that's not conventionally eaten. B'chutz, loy pigel. Rashi, here in the Mishnah, it says one pshat, and in the Gemara, he's going to say another pshat. And Tosfos talks about it. So loy pigel says Zevach, looking at Rashi over here, the lav gufay dezifchim. Shalil and shilya are not part of the gufay b'hem. They're not considered part of the b'hem. And therefore, if you have kavana to eat those out of bounds, it will not be mefagel. The reason why this is going to become difficult and why Rashi is going to say a different shot is because does it become mispagel? We're going to see a sheet in the Gemara. Rabbi Elazar is going to hold that even though if you have kavana to eat these out of bounds, it won't make the animal pigel, but if the animal is pigel because someone had kavana to eat the meat at the wrong time, these will be also. But the problem is, if the reason for it is, as Rashi says over here, that it's not considered part of the zevach, so then it shouldn't become pigel either. So that's the difficulty that we're going to have with this Rashi.
How could it be kosher? How can it be kosher for if you don't shecht it, right? You're allowed to eat. Pardon me?
Its mother was shechted.
Its mother was shechted, right? So it's considered part of the animal.
The heter shchita.
Yes, right. So how is it considered their part of the animal? In our case, not.
That's also a good question. So you're besides the fact that we're going to have a problem with mispagel and mifagel, how could it be half and half?
Right.
Yeah, that's a good problem. So that's why Rashi's going to have a different shot on the Gemara. So Zog to Gemara, hamoilik es hatoyin. What if you make melika on a bird, but there's an egg inside it? Lechel beitzei mechutz. So you don't have a mind to eat them out of bounds, but you have a mind to eat their egg out of bounds. Again, loy pigel, because it's not part of the animal. Chelav or cholav mukdoshin, the milk of mukdoshin. Again, we're talking about a female animal. Uveitei toyin ein chayovin alei mishum pigel v'noisher v'tamei. So isn't it telling? The Mishnah is discussing two categories of things that are not mefagel: shilya shlil, eggs and milk. And only by the eggs and milk does the Mishnah also say that they're not part of the animal, and therefore ein chayavin alei mishum pigel v'noisher v'tamei. But it doesn't say that about shlil and shilya. That's very telling. The Gemara is going to bring a raya from there that in fact by the shilya and the shlil, if the animal is pigel due to something else, that also is also to eat the chiv cars. Unlike the other way around. Amar Rabbi Elazar, pigel bezevach, if you had kavana of pigel in the carbon, meaning you had kavana that you're going to eat the meat chutz l'zmanoi, nispagel al shalil. The shalil will become pigel, and meaning if you eat the shalil, it will be chiv kars. However, b'shalil, if you had kavana to eat the shalil chutz l'zmanoi, loy nispagel al zevach. So that's a little bit of a paradox. Let's see if Rashi explains it over here. So Rashi on the Gemara says, if I could find it, Gemara, pigel bezevach, shachta almanas lechoil, oy lahakte chutas manoi, nispagel hashalil, ha'oichel me'ashalil chayiv. If you eat the shalil, you'll be chayiv kars. It's part of the animal. But if you had kavanah kars, if the kavanah of chutas manoi, to eat the shalil chutas manoi, sheshachar es zevach almanas lechol me'ashalil chutas manoi, lo nispagel zevach, kasover Rabbi Elazar, Shalil gufa dezivchava. It is part of the zavach, and therefore it answers David's kasha that avada it becomes huter b'shchita. The uber yerechimayu, and that's why it's huter b'shchita. Umiyu ein machshavosay mifagelas hazevach the davar shein darkei lechol. Yes, it could be eaten. Yes, it's part of the zavach, but the ruba de inchi lo yachle. Most people wouldn't eat it, and since most people wouldn't eat it, it's not something that's going to be mifagel. However, and there ushlil atzmoi. Loy nispagel, and even if you have kavana to eat the shalil, chutlas manoi, never mind, it won't make the whole behemoth pigel. It won't even make the shalil pigel. It won't make pigel. But if it became pigel because it's part of the zavach, because someone that kavanah to eat the meat chutlas manoi, and this Meshuggah wanted to eat something that no one else eats, it's still chayiv kares. So the second shot in Rashi is that the reason why it's not mifagel is because it's not derech achila bekach to eat these items, but it will become pigel if you had kavanah to eat a piece of meat. It will become pigel. Yet, and then if you decide to eat it, if you decide to eat the shilya, which is part of the animal, there will be chipos. Okay, how about pigel ba'alal? He had kavanah while he was checking that he'll eat the alal, which is a non-edible artery that goes to the neck of the animal. Pigel ba'alal nispag lemura. So I have to correct myself. This alal, Rashi says, is not talking about the alal of a behema, which is not edible, which the Mishnah says already won't make pigel, won't become the spagal either. This is thinking about the alal on a bird, which is much softer and it is edible. As Rashi shall oif royu lachilahu the rakav. So alal is like any other of the meat of a bird. If you had kavanah to eat part of the meat of the bird out of the right time, nispagla mura, the mura, which is the sac where it's not part of the digestive system, which no one eats. It has soya inside it. That would become pigel. But the mura loy nispagel alal. But if you had kavanah to eat the mura out of the right time, the alal won't become pigel. Again, it's the same svara as Rashi says. Mura is like hazi lachila, the pirsha ba'almahu. It's just soya. Hilchach machshavah didal mafagla umiyu hechad in ispagala oif aydei davar acher, and this Meshuggah wants to eat it. Kivan diki inshi da'achli chayav alofkar. Pigel be'emurin. What if he had kavanah to be makdir the emurin chutz l'zmanoi nispaglu parim? Of course, the meat also becomes asher to eat. Biparim, if you had kavanah to eat the meat chutz l'zmanoi, loy nispaglu emurim, the emurim will not be chayav pigel. Why is that? Loy nispaglu emurim l'schayav kares ha'oichel mikloyos u'meyeser shekavach shalem. So even though this animal is pigel, and even the emurim, the part that you would put on the mizbeach, are pigel, if you eat those pieces which are normally not eaten, you're not chayav kares. The chol shekain, the loy nispaglu parim atzmon, kol shekain. Oh, so I have to clarify that the animals that we're talking about, these purim are purim hamnisrafim. We're talking about purim that you're not makter the meat on the mizbeach at all. There were a series of purim, like the paralam davishal tzibar, the parakoyin Mashiach, the purim on Yom Kippurim, the meat was not eaten by anybody. The meat was not burnt, and it wasn't burnt on the mizbeach either. It was burnt to Beis Hadeshin. So it was part of the animal that it's meat, but it's not anything that's eaten as part of the carbon, not by the mizbeach and not by a person. Remember, pigel is only if you have a machshava to do an achila, either achila samizbeach, which includes zrika, which includes haktar semurin, or achila, which includes the meat. But that's only if the meat is supposed to be eaten by a person or it's supposed to be put on the mizbeach. But what if we have meat that's not supposed to be eaten by anybody? It's supposed to be burnt. That's not in the parsha of pigel. So now let me reread the Gemara properly. Pigel be'emurin. If when shechting one of these parim, he had kavana to be makar de'emurim out of bounds, nispaglu parim, then the meat also becomes osher bano, even though the meat wasn't something that you were going to put on the mizbeach, but it still becomes osher bano, and it's a chiv course if you eat it. It's part of the animal. But the parim, if you had kavana to eat the meat of the animal out of bounds, that's not a problem, because that meat was never supposed to be eaten by the mizbeach. That meat was only going to be burnt by the malkam adeshin, and therefore it won't make pigel. No nispag lemurim, nothing becomes pigel. So here I says, "Lo nispag lemurim l'schayav kares oichel mikloyitz oy miyaser sakavich shlem v'chol shekain the lo nispag leparmatzman." Kol shekain, if you eat the meat itself, there's no isur pigel on it. Sharechisha v'lechol davar shein darkei lechol. What were you planning to eat chutz zman? The meat. The meat is not something that would have been a matana on the mizbeach. But really, it doesn't become pickle at all. If someone has kavana to eat meat chutz manoi, meat that was never supposed to be put on the mizbeach, that's not pickle at all, and therefore nothing becomes pickle. Let's see if we can bring a raya to Rabbi Elazar's halacha that you can have something that if you have kavana to eat it chutz manoi, it won't make pickle. Yet, if you had kavana on the basar chutz manoi, even this part will become pickle. Right? That's what he said about the shilya. If you have kavanah to eat the shilya chutz manoi, it won't be pickle. But if you get kavanah to eat the meat chutz manoi, now if you eat the shilya, it will be chayav kares. Where do you see that you could have such a break? Because it says in the Mishnah, Vishavin, they both agree. So Rashi, who's arguing? Who's arguing? There's a machlokes Rab Shimon and the Chachamim that have a machlokes later on in the Masechta. If pickle is bechalal noig by param hanisraf. So they both agree, Shemchisha bachilas param ubisrefrosan loyasav laklum. If you had kavana to eat the param, to eat the meat of these param that's supposed to be burned, or to burn the param, but out of the right time, loyasav laklum, that's not pickle. Why? Because these are things that are not a matana to the mizbeach. Only the matana to the mizbeach, a matana la'adam, only thinking about doing that chutz l'zmani makes pickle, but not thinking about something that has to be burnt outside. So my love, it's mashma that it's only one way. But if you had kavana to eat the murim out of bounds, nispaglu parim, the parim would become pickle. So you see, you could have a one-way relationship. Zokmar law, you can't bring a rye from there, because I can just as easily say, Hachishav be'murim, nispaglu emurim atzmon. That's what I would say. Not that the meat will become osir machmas pigel, the emurim becomes osir machmas pigel. So at the end of the day, you don't have a raya to Rabbi Elazar. You don't have a kash on him, but we're looking to bring a raya to him. Zokmar, let's see if we could try another raya. Tashma, Torim on the Srafim, Usirim on the Srafim, Moyalin Bahem Mishoch. The moment we remark these animals, they're going to become kodesh, and if you have enough of them, that's mitila. Nishchatu, once they become shechted, now they're subject to more problems. Huchshuru lipasel b'tful yoim. The huchshuru lakabel tuma, and therefore if tful yoim touches it, it will become posel because of tuma. Ubemechusik kippurim, it also becomes posel machos tuma. Because mechusik kippurim is not allowed to touch karbanos. Uvelina, and on any problem related to lina. Meaning, say if you actually let it remain overnight and it became noisar, and say if you shechted with the kavana of letting it stay overnight, which would be pigel. So my love, linas basar. My love, it's speaking about linas basar, ushmamina, migu de pasla belina, pasla la machshava. And therefore you will learn that even if you have a kavana of lina on the basar, it will be possible b'machshava. So Zok Rashi as follows: My love linas basar katani shimlon nifsal. If it was left overnight, it will be possible. Unehi nami the heicha de chishav basar atzmoi loy sidaik mina the machshava b'davar shadach elechal boy. We know for sure that if you had kavana to eat this meat, chutz l'zmanoi, that won't make pickle. Because remember, this meat is from Sirim on the Srafin and Parim on the Srafin. So you cannot have a machshava of pickle on those because they are things that are not a matana to the Mizbeach. So what does it mean? Postal ba machshava. Zot Rashi, unehi nami deich dechisha ba basar atzmoi, laisidik mina, do machshava do v'shadak lechal bina. Ubrai said, il nami tanya behedya, v'shavin, shemchisha v'lechal parim, loyasa klum, afidu l'psul, because this meat is supposed to be burnt outside, it's not subject to pickle. Nevertheless, mil hadakinimina the machshavas linas emurim mevagelas abasar krabalosar. Since we say they're subject to lina, and even the machshava of lina, that means if you had a machshava of chustas mamay to be makter the emurim, it would also make the meat osir. So once again, you see this relationship that even if you were chayshiv on the meat itself to eat it chustas mamay, it would not make the carbon pickle, but if you were chayshiv on the emurim, machshavas pickle, it would answer this meat. Zok Gemara, no, you don't have a raya. Migu the Pastor, Belina Pastor, Machshava Zaloi, Lina Seymurim. It doesn't mean Machshava. It only means Lina Seymurim. Meaning, if you let them, if you had a Machshava, to leave the Emurim overnight, the Emurim become also. All we mean to say is the Emurim will become possibly. The machshavas linas emurim efagels bemurim. All you can prove is a machshava of chutz manly to be makav the emurim will asher the emurim, but you don't have a raya. It'll asher the boser. Zok to Gemara hamit ketani seifa, but it says in the seifa kulan moyalan behen ad beis adeshen ad sheyutach habosar. There's a meila on all of these items until the meat is already totally destroyed. In other words, there's me'ila on the meat of this carbon, even when it's in the base of the burning, until it's so burnt that it's not even meat anymore. Michlal, it's mashma. The reisha, linas basar. The seifa of the Mishnah that says there's still going to be an issue of me'ila on this meat basically tells us that we're talking about the meat. You want to say that when we're talking about the psulina, we're not talking about the meat at all. But you see, the Mishnah is still, or the Bryce is still referring to the meat, because the next halacha talks about moyalim behen, and everyone agrees you'll be moyal in the meat. So if the later halacha in the Mishnah talking about me'ila is referring to the meat, the earlier part of the Mishnah we're talking about lina should also be speaking about the meat. Dr. Gemara, no. Midi area. Who said? Hachidisa, hachidisa. Reisha imur. The reisha is only talking about the psul pigel that will apply to the imurim and not to the meat. This sefer that's speaking about me'ila will also be referring to the basar. So we're sort of desperate to bring a rye to Rabbi Lozer. The rye is going to be right in front of us from our Mishnah that we already spoke out. Meisiv Rabba. Now Rabba is going to ask a kasha on Rabbi Lozer. The elu she'ein mefadl. The following is a list of items that will not make pigel, and the ein mispaglin that cannot become pigel. So they're so not part of the animal. Semer sheberosh kvasim. The hair on the head of the kvasim, because there were kvasim that were actually served on the mizbeach even without taking the skin off. But the hair is not part of the carbon. Us'ar shebizak and teyoshim. And Rashi says, olu yerdu. Even if you put the head on the mizbeach with that hair, you got to take it off and take that hair off. It doesn't belong in the mizbeach. V'or v'roitiv v'akipa v'alal v'amura. We had all these items already. V'atamis v'gidim v'karnayim v'atlavin v'shlil v'ashilya v'cholov hamukdoshin u'beitzei tayrin. All of these items are not part of the animal. Kulon loy mefaglin v'loy mispaklin. I shouldn't say they're not part of the animal. I should say, what Rashi says in the second shot, that they're not things that are normally eaten. Loy mefaglin v'loy mispaklin. Ve'ein chayovin alayin mishum pigel noiser v'tamei, and v'amayla mehen b'chutz. And if you take any one of these items from a carbon, and you're makar them b'chutz, the halach is if you're makar a carbon b'chutz, there's a chiv kares. What if I was makar one of these parts b'chutz? Potter, because these are not items that belong on the mizbeach. So Zok to Gemara, my love, when it says in our Mishnah, loy, in this brayso, that we just quoted, loy mefaglin hazevach, loy mispaglin machmas zevach. All it says is loy mefaglin v'loy mispaglin. So let's say it means loy mefaglin hazevach. If you had kavana to eat these chustlas manai, it won't make the whole carbon pigel. V'loy mispaglin machmasavach, and v'loy mispaglin means if you had kavana to eat the meat or to be makib de murin of any one of these karbanas chustlas manai, it won't make these items pigel. Means these items, if you eat them, will not have a chiv kares. So that's a kasha on Rabbi Lozer, because Rabbi Lozer agrees with this halacha on all the other items in the brisa. But on shulya and on shalil, Rabbi Lozer says there, if the animal was pigel and you ate these, you would be chayiv kares. Zok to Gemara, Zok to Gemara, and the Mura as well. He said, Zok to Gemara loy. You know what it means? Loy mefaglin es hazevach, v'loy mespaglin machmazatzma. But what loy mespaglin doesn't mean by shulya, it doesn't mean that if the animal became pigel because you had kavanah to eat the meat or the imurid chutz manoi, that this doesn't become pigel. It means if you had kavanah to eat this, the shulya chutz manoi, it won't be mefagel the zevach, and it won't be mefagel itself either. That's what it means. But avad, if the zevach became pigel, avada the shalil and the shilya would still carry a chiyuv kares, like Rabbi Lozer said. Frank the more ihachi had the katani seifa kulam loy mefagel loy mispaglin hasulamali. If you look at the brayso, it's very repetitive. What does it say? Veilish ein mefagel loy mispaglin. So it already says the following list are ein mefagel loy mispaglin. It lists the whole list, and then the brayso repeats it again. Kulam loy mefagel loy mispaglin. Why did it say it an extra time? So the Gemara says instead of an extra time, it's to tell us that not only is it not mefagel itself, even if the whole animal became pigel, loy mispaglin, this wouldn't be usher, which will be a kasha on Rabbi Lozer. So hasulomali, you're the one who's pointing out that since something is mentioned an extra time, you have to learn something out of it, and you want to prove to me that it must be that if the animal became pigel, the shalil and the shilya would still not have an isser of kares. What about the next line in the Mishnah? What is in the next line? The ein chayav nalei mishum pigel. Again, it repeats itself. This is the third time it repeats itself. So lutameich ein chayav nalei mishum pigel, where the brayso repeats it a third time. Hasulamali. What are you going to learn out of that? You want to say, since it says it a second time, it must be that if the zevach became pigel, nevertheless, v'loy mispaglin, the shilya won't be pigel. Okay, but then if you're going to be medayik on every time the brayso repeats itself, how are you going to explain the third time the brayso repeats itself? It says vein chayav lo b'shum pigel. Hasulamli. Ella, what are you going to be forced to say? I did the boil of mishnah noiser the tame, since the mishnah or the brayso is adding that they're not subject to noiser and tame. So Tana Pigel, Agavorcha threw in Pigel, not because there's a special lesson to be learned from Pigel, but the Tana is saying listing up all the things that is not susceptible to add to the list, Noiser and Tome. So once it's giving a list, it throws in Pigel as well. Don't make any hay out of it. Hachanami, so too I can say, you know why the Tana repeats, Loi mifaglin, v'loi mispaglin, is Ayi devoy lemisli hamayla mehem bechutz. The brayso wanted to continue telling us more halachas about it, like if you are makrabit on the mizbech chutz lazara, that won't be a problem of shkutei chutz. So since it's talking about halachas, it throws this in as well. In other words, all the extra times that loy mispaglin is mentioned in the brayso is lav davka, it's agavorcha something else, and therefore you cannot bring the araya that it would not be mispagel, because in fact Rabbi Lozer holds it will be mispagel if the animal became big. Rav Amar Af Anan Nami Tanina. We have a raya. We have a raya to Rabbi Lozer. And finally, our Mishnah. Hashechel is a Mekdoshin Lechel Shlil Loy Shilya Bechutz Loy Pigel. V'Amoylek is a Torem Lechel B'Tzein Bechutz Loy Pigel. And then V'Hodr Tani Cholav HaMekdoshin Uvetzei Torem. And it's very clearly leaving out Shlil and Shilya. Ein Chayav and Alav Aleyan Mishum Pigel Noiser V'Tami. Hashlil v'shilya would be chayiv. Elalav shmamina kan machmas azevach kan machmas atmon shmamina. You have a clear raya that they will not, although they cannot make pigel. If the zevach became pigel, avada they would ask. Now there's one little technical difficulty, because what does it say in our Mishnah at the end about beitzei tayrim and cholav hamakdashim? You're not chayiv mishum pigel noiser v'tamei. The problem is noiser v'tamei still applies to shilya and shlil, as we see in the brayso. It says about them that v'chayav mishum pigel noiser v'tamei. So the mefarshim say, yeah, since it couldn't list the gabi noiser v'tamei, it doesn't list the gabi pigel. Zok to Gemara weiter. I'm sorry, since it can't list the gabi pigel, it leaves it out for noiser and tamei as well, because by pigel, in fact, it will become pigel. Zok more about it. Tanan Hasan. Ubali mumin. What if you have a carbon that's a bal mum? Now we know there's halacha im olu lo yerdu. However, there are certain carbonas that even if it's olu, even if they were wrongfully put on the mizbech, you do take them off the mizbech. So what about a carbon that's a bal mum? Rabbi Kiva machsher bebali mum. So the Tanakam hold a bal mum that was put onto the mizbech, you got to take it off. Rabbi Kiva holds no. If a bal mum was put on the mizbech, you leave it on them. Olu lo yerdu. Lo yikshu Rabbi Kiva, that Rabbi Kiva said that im alul lo yerdu, even on a balmum, that's only ela bedukin shabayin, only if the type of mum is a mum that wouldn't be a problem for an oif. Hoyluk sheim ba'oif. So condition number one, it can't be something that would possible an oif. In other words, an oif is not possible with a mum. An oif is possible with a mechusar aver. It's missing an aver. If it's missing an aver, Rabbi Kiva would agree. Rabbi Kiva would agree that im olu yerdu. But if it's not missing an aver, it just has a mum that wouldn't possible a knife, that im olu lo yerdu. We'll leave it up. But it needs to have another tonight. It had to first become hektish and then it got the smum. Because if it got the mum before it became hektish, then it never became hektish. So you're taking a be'em of chulun, putting it on his beach. On that we don't say im olu lo yerdu. We only say im olu lo yerdu if it was a be'em that was kodesh, then it got this mum, and then you put it on the mizbeach, then you say im olu lo yerdu. And umoyde Rabbi Kiva ba'oilas nekeva. Now, an oila can only be brought with a male animal. An oila cannot be brought with a female animal. So if someone went to a female animal and said, I raise an oila, there, if you shechted it by mistake and put that on the mizbeach, Rabbi Kiva also agrees you have to take that off the mizbeach. Why? The chaman, the kodam, muma, lagdeshadami. It's just like the mum came before it became ekdish, because it was never royu to become an oila in the first place. Masav Rabbi Zeir. So Rabbi Zeir had a kasha. It says in the Mishnah, in the Brisa that we learned earlier, Hamayla mehen b'chutz pater. It says about a shilya and a shalil. If you're makar of those on the mizbeach outside of the azara, you're not mechuyev on shchutei chutz. Right? That's what it says. Now this is meat. The shilya is meat. If you took this meat and you were makar of it on the mizbeach b'chutz, you're not chayiv al shchutei chutz. We can make a diak. Hama iman chayiv. Obviously, if it's a shlil and a shlil, it's a female animal, but this is inside. So it's mashma that if I was makriv from a female animal, b'chutz, it would be chayiv al shchutei chutz. V'hechi mishkachesla. How would it be possible? How would it be possible? Now we're talking about meat. Let's think about it. When are you ever makriv meat on a mizbeach? If it's a shlamim, which you could bring within the keva, the meat, you're never putting the meat on the mizbeach. So there's no problem of shchutei chutz. So it has to be talking about meat that you were supposed to bring on the mizbeach. Means it has to be speaking about an oila. And it has to be speaking about in the keva, because how else did it have a shnil or a shulya? So zog to Gemara, v'echem ishkachesla. Only if it's an oilas nekeva. So iyamrit b'shlomek l'shavar Rabbi Kiva, oilas nekeva, and also loy tered. B'shlomek Rabbi Kiva would agree that even if it's in the keva, im also loy tered, you'd leave it on the mizbeach. If it has halach of im also loy tered, then it would still be subject to shchutei chutz. So then you can explain why, if you took a female oila, which shouldn't have been an oila, and you were makar with chutz, there'll be an issur of shchutei chutz, because even though it's not a kosher carbon, but it's kosher enough that if it would have been put on the mizbeach, it would remain on the mizbeach. But eliyamrit im also tered. But if you're going to say, like what we're saying over here in the Gemara, umoydi Rabbi Kiva, that an oilas nekeva, you would have to take off the mizbeach. So hamami. The brisa that says dafka the shilya hamayla b'chutz is potter. But if you were makar part of the mother b'chutz, it would be chayiv. Who is that going according to? It's not Rabbi Kiva, it's not the Chachamim, because this is an animal that's not royal at all to be brought on the mizbeach. Zog to Gemara, I'll tell you what you're going to have to say. Ema hamayla mehen b'chutz potter ha me'imure iman chayiv. Don't make a diak. This basar b'chutz is potter, but the basar of the mother is chayiv. No, say this basar is potter, but the imurin of the mother would be chayiv, and the imurin of an oila. And I'm sorry, we're speaking about a shleis. Say we're speaking about a shlamim. Say we're speaking about a shlamim, and say the dik is that not if you were makar of this basar b'chutz, it's potter, but if you're makar of the basar iman b'chutz, it's chayiv. No. Be medayik if you're makar of the imurin of the mother outside your chayiv, because that's basar shlamim, which could be in the cave. Frankly, more, but you can't say that. V'amehen katani v'iman domi the two. The comparison would be if you say if you put the meat of the shilya on the mizbech potter, so the parallel dik is the meat of the mother, you'd be chayiv. You can't say how the imurin of the mother you'd be chayiv. It's not parallel. Elaema hamayla me niureyan b'chutz potter. Say if you're Mila from the imurin of the shilya, you're potter. Which is tickle doichi, because it's not only the imurin of the shilya that's potter, it's even the imurin, it's even the buzzer of the shilya with potter. But we're focusing on the imurim. Sorry, it's a fetus. I mean, it has somewhat developed stuff. So therefore, we'll say that it's talking about a shlomim. A shlomim is an akeva, and therefore it would be subject to shchute chutz. Okay. Zok to Gemara weiter. Zok to Gemara weiter. Zok to the Mishnah. Shachtu almanas leaniach. We have this Mishnah as well. Shachtu almanas leaniach is domei emur v'lmacher. So he didn't have a mind of machshavas pigel. I will shecht l'macher. I will eat it l'macher. No, I just won't. I won't do anything until tomorrow. What I'll do tomorrow, I didn't even think about that. I'm just saying I'm putting a pause on everything. I'm not doing anything until tomorrow. That will make the carbon puzzle. If you leave everything until tomorrow, it's possible. If you don't make this rikas and dam today, if you don't need to meet today, it'll be possible. True. But that doesn't mean you had a kavanah to do something, or you had in mind to take the blood out of the azara, which would passel it. So Rabbi Yehuda holds that passes, which is a big chiddush, because up until now we only know that a machshavas pigel passes a carbon. If you take the blood out, yeah, it'll passel the carbon. But if you even think to take the blood out, that's a big chiddush that will passel the carbon. It doesn't become pigel. The chamachshirin comes off a Where did you dream up this new psul that developed a thought to do something wrong and makes the carbon puzzle? The only type of wrong thought that puzzles is pigel. How about amanas litnan al gabe akeves shaloi keneged yisoid? Or you had in mind to spritz the blood on the wrong part of the mizbeach, or velitein is hanitten lamayla lamata, vesanitten lamata lamayla, vesanitten befnim bechutz, or bechutz befnim. But the halacha is, or sheyachlu tmeim, or sheyakriveyu tmeim, or sheyachlu areilim, v'yishakrivu areilim. Or l'shaber atzmos pesach, you have kavanah to shchita that you're going to break the bones of the carbon pesach. It says in it v'atzmos hishbur boy. Or lecha limenu no. It says you're not allowed to eat the carbon pesach raw. You had kavanah to eat the carbon pesach raw. Ula arav damay b'dam apsulam, or to mix the dam with dam psulam, kosher. All these were kosher. She'ein machshava poiselas, the only machshava that passes a carbon. Ela b'chutz zmanay b'chutz l'koymay v'apesach v'achat shaloi l'shema. Everything else is a kosher carbon, and Rabbi Yehuda only adds that if I thought lanichai, or to take the blood out, that'll possible as well. But any other thing that you have in mind during the shechita to do something wrong, that does not possible carbon. Okay, we'll stop here.